First of all, good morning, everyone, and good evening to you, Girish. So, welcome to another edition of Tech Talks with NASCOM Insights. And thank you so much for joining today's discussion on Advantage India, Gateway to Global Engineering, R&D, and Innovation. So we have leaders from ER&D industry as well as leading consultants from the sector. And being one of the fastest growing economies in the world, India is continuing to attract multinational companies to tap into its rich and diverse ecosystem. And I'm Vandana. I'm a senior manager at NASCOM Insights team, focusing on ER&D related research. So today's discussion is sort of centered around Indian ER&D landscape as well as global as well, and the initiatives that the companies are taking, and we'll share examples of innovation, talent excellence, service delivery excellence, and resilience primarily from the engineering R&D players, Indian ER&D players. And for that, with that, we have with us two of the most eminent speakers who are at the heart of the action. Mr. Girish Gaitonde, founder and CEO of Zorient. Now, Zorient is a Silicon Valley headquartered product engineering, software development, and technology services firm with offices in the US, Europe, and Asia. And we also have Karan Kamal, co-founder at Future Factor 360, which is a boutique consulting firm based in Bangalore and Detroit. And they focus on driving globalization, market growth, digital transformation, and building a winning talent culture. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining today's discussion.
Thanks, Vandana.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. So I'll set the context to the discussion. So in the last 2 decades, great strides have been made in the Indian ER&D sector, and it is expected to reach around 63 billion by 2025, up from 31 billion USD in 2019. Now, India has emerged as a global powerhouse for ER&D and is steadfastly committed to ushering future growth and innovation for global enterprises. Now, across sectors and technologies, India provides differentiated engineering R&D services that have global enterprises in the context of driving revenue growth, operational excellence, competitive differentiation, product innovation, and regulatory compliance. So this year, NASCOM partnered with Future Factor 360 to bring out a report called Advantage India, Gateway to Global Engineering R&D and Innovation, as we believe that India will be the home to global ER&D companies and will be the destination of choice for ER&D in the years to come. So this report is a testimony to the achievements and value propositions of the Indian ER&D ecosystem, and that has led to India becoming a destination of choice for ER&D. So it also highlights stories of innovation, talent excellence, resilience from the Indian players. And this is available at our NASCOM website as well as NASCOM community website. And I would invite everyone to kindly download and explore the study, and the links will be shared in the description below. So to start with, so as you know, the overall ER&D landscape, and you know how the global corporate ER&D spend is around $772 billion. So, and of course, as shared earlier, India's ER&D sourcing market is around 31 billion, which is expected to more than sort of double up to 63 billion by 2025. So this growth has sort of slowed down a little bit in the last year in the wake of the pandemic. So Girish, the first question to you, post the pandemic, how do you see ER&D companies reimagining their business model? So you can give us a Bay Area flavor as well. And how are these companies changing and adapting to the post-pandemic world?
Sure. First of all, thanks for inviting me here. And just want to talk about this particular question that you talked about. You know, in our case, the business was definitely a little bit down last year because of some projects got cut, etc. due to COVID. But from Q4 calendar last year, that is October to December 2020 and onwards, the demand has definitely increased quite a lot. And I think what has happened is the companies which saw that they should have digitized much faster because their competitors did, and they took away a lot of business. they wanted to digitize themselves, and as a result, there is a lot of demand over there. And then, and what happened also, all the companies, including us, the supply kind of got choked because we did not train enough people. So right now it's the other way around. The demand is definitely more than the supply, and so there is a lot of gap over there. What has changed here is, I think, companies got convinced that they could work multi-geography, multi companies, meaning the clients as well as us. We are now very comfortable hiring a person in the remote part of India and or somewhere else and make them work. So I think the things have changed in terms of where the clients are, where the talent is, and how it is organized to deliver the projects.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. Karan, you've been closely involved in writing this report with NASSCOM. So the next question is to you. So what do you think are, some of the trends that you see emerging in ER&D companies in India? Karan, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Karan, you're on mute.
Thanks for having me as a part of this discussion today. So the world of ER&D, as we know it, has fundamentally changed, right? We're seeing new dynamics of competition. You have some of the new digital entrants competing with some of the world's largest and the oldest companies. And at the same time, you have some of the low-cost alternatives from China, which is forcing some of the large global enterprises to relook at what their offerings are in terms of products for the market. So in this context, products as we see today are being remastered as smart, intelligent, and connected products with an intent to drive differentiation and create new revenue pools. And at the same time, while these products are becoming more smart and intelligent and connected, it's also creating issues related to security, privacy, with huge regulatory implications. We're also seeing sustainability becoming a central tenet to every product and process. Right? Organizations are making sustainability, circular economy, a central part of their agenda. Now, for addressing some of these emerging imperatives and trends, it's increasingly becoming important for our ER&D functions within these organizations to become more robust and also innovative. So these are what we believe are some of the trends that's reshaping how ER&D is being delivered in the new normal.
Sure. Thanks, Karan. So, Girish, same question to you as well. So, globally, what do you see some trends emerging in the ER&D sector? So, yeah, with post-pandemic as well, but otherwise also, in the last 2 years, what have you seen?
I think as Karan said, right, one of the things that companies are expected to do is, number one is be ubiquitous to available to everybody, and so multi-language, multicultural issues, etc., and that's becoming very important. Of course, the security, privacy that Karan talked about are very important, and what happens is the design and implementation parameters that are needed to make that happen become very complicated, and that needs a lot of engineering, to be able to do that. Also, the performance, of course, it has to be available at all the time. It has to be responsive at all the times. So the UI responsive, reactive UI, and those kind of things become very critical. And also, what we have seen is, in general, is that the world is becoming kind of totally connected. So testing the product in multiple environments and making sure that it is connecting to different APIs, different kind of functionalities and all that, it is becoming very critical. So the testing becomes very important. Usability testing as well as functionality testing, and performance testing all become very important. So the product has to be complete, and the core versus context is becoming very critical. That means that the main product companies that do the core part of the product. Of course, that's what they're going to invest in. But to complete the product, to kind of make it work with everything else, make it usable, etc., that is becoming very critical. So the partnership with the R&D outsourcers is becoming very critical for these companies.
Yeah, that's
So,
a valid point. Yeah.
Vandana, if I can just add to what Girish
Sure,
said.
sure.
If
Yeah.
you look at the new age smart connected products, right? So traditionally you had products in the mechanical domain or the electronics domain, but now we are looking at products that are at the intersection of mechanical, electronics, fluidic
Sure.
domain, thermal domain, right? So the product in itself is getting more complex, which means that testing of these products is also going to become more complex, creating infinitely many scenarios, right? So this is as products are becoming more intelligent and smart, I think it's also creating complexity around engineering processes, and that's where I believe partnerships with service providers would become critical as as organizations go through their testing journeys for some of
Sure,
these.
sure. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense because now the car is not just a means of transport. It has it has everything in it, and so many complications and so many complex operations going on. So yeah, completely with you, Girish and Karan. So, of course, we've talked about connectedness, we've talked about digitization, and how, there's an increased focus on digital first products, which has been, in the recent years, and especially post pandemic, this adoption of digitization has really gone up. So, Girish, starting with you, how is it going within your own company? So, how have you specifically focused on digitization more so post pandemic, or has it always been around? What has been your experience?
Sure. It's a good question. And see, having born in the Silicon Valley and continued in the Silicon Valley, we are typically and we work a lot with startups over here. It's a very important customer segment for us. And even though the volume of the business it may not be the most, the technologies that we work with are completely state of the art, and they're many times ahead of the curve, many times. So digitization, if you look at two components, which is the cloud and the big data and the UI and everything. Having worked with Facebook quite a lot, Yahoo quite a lot, and all these different companies, right? AWS, Azure, and all that. We have been involved with different parts of digital components quite a lot, and building it together. Now what we do is we work with Microsoft Azure quite a lot in their IoT side, where they give the platform for both connecting to the devices as well as managing the data to do the loop completely. Now, by providing Azure is not going to complete the solution for them. We have to go to their different users, their different customers, and make it happen for them. And then also work on the data to make the prediction and all that quite well. So the result, what has happened is, now we have started about a couple of years back. We have started completing the loop with digital transformation, and that has worked out very well for us.
Yeah. I think, I mean, completing the loop and being a part in the entire value chain, exactly, that really does help a lot. So, Karan, while you were doing the research for this report, so if you could share some other examples that you saw in India when, there has been a rapid adoption of digitization. So, what could you share, from your research and experience?
Absolutely. So if you look at the whole digital transformation journey, right, companies are undergoing this transformation across their products, manufacturing plants, processes, people practices. And And let me just cite the example of digital first products as you began this with, right? While a few years ago you could just think of a smartphone or a smartwatch as being the only smart devices, we are seeing smart products across almost every domain, be it automotive, be it aerospace, be it industrial, right? Be it energy and utilities. So it's becoming smart products are becoming ubiquitous. And as I mentioned earlier, it's largely to drive differentiation, capture new revenue pools. Right. One of the examples that we saw is airbag, right? Airbag typically is a restraint system, a safety restraint system. But now the same airbag is getting reimagined as a crash detection, monitoring, and response solution, right? Which in the event of an air crash, it just does not provide the function of safeguarding the driver and the passengers, but with the sensors that are now installed in the airbag, you're now able to determine what's the extent of injury to the driver and the passengers. Based on the extent of injury, you're now able to also dispatch emergency responders in a way that there is no under triage or an over triage. The hospitals can get ready, based on the extent of injury to the occupants of the vehicle. At the same time, it also provides insurance companies with a potential to better understand the events leading up to the crash, right? So these are how some of these products are fundamentally getting reimagined in the digital world, and we are seeing a lot of these examples. We are seeing a lot of such initiatives around smart products being delivered from some of the Indian GCCs, as well as from the service providers who are supporting the global enterprises in their digital transformation journey.
Great, great. Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting point that you made regarding the airbags. I mean, initially one would never think that it could also be used in such a way. But yeah, I mean, that's a valid example. Yes, definitely. So, the ER&D industry is, of course, has its own share of players, including the global capability centers and the service providers as well. So in India, we have over 1430 GCCs, and ER&D GCCs, their market size is expected to reach around 20 billion at the end of 2021. And also for service providers, 44 of the top 50 global ESPs have centers in India. So, both these players are constantly working with evolving technologies. Now, we have spoken about digitization and digitalization, but with that also comes innovation, right? I mean, it cannot be the same thing, and we have to continue to innovate and create new innovative products and processes. So, Girish, what kind of new products and what kind of innovation is happening in your company? Is it only focused towards products, or is it towards processes as well? And how, especially after the pandemic, how do you see innovation now taking more precedence and more interest is being generated within the companies, within your company, and of course what you see globally as well, since you are in the Bay Area? So
Sure.
what is that? Yeah.
So innovation is a continuous process, right? So it is. So pandemic just kind of accelerated some part of it, but it has been a continuous process. So we have seen out here, innovation from the right from the on all different aspects, the compute side, the storage, network infrastructure, and the applications, data, everything is getting innovated. So you are actually, for the first time, you're combining data from your transactional system, typical systems that you have with documents, emails, text, and everything and IoT, the things that Karan talked about in terms of sensors and all that. That to be able to manage that amount of data really fast and make something out of it, that is something we couldn't have imagined. It was only the parlance of the oil and natural gas companies and some very, very rich companies they could do that in the past. Now, because of cloud and everything, anybody can do that now. A lot of people can do that. So, having said that, right? What do we do as a company? Over the last few years, we have been, you have to, kind of worship innovation. among the employees, and also encourage that, reward that, and publicize that. That means this is something that has to be done. And we do a lot of hackathons, where people can show their creativity. We do a show called kind of exhibition called TechX, where different employees participate and can show whatever innovation they have done. They can show. We call the industry people as well as academic people to come and evaluate those things and contribute to those things. We have applied for in the company. We have applied for about 6 to 7 patents in the last couple of years. Some on the process, some on the more on the product side, some on the process, etc. So we continue we co-invent. One of those patents have been co-invented with a very large ERP company, actually the enterprise software company, and we continue to do those things.
That's a very interesting point that you made, that you have to worship innovation, and then how, as the CEO, you've created this kind of an innovation culture within your own company where it is worshipped and celebrated as well. So that's, really heartening to see. Yes. So, Karan, same question to you. So, what have you seen? What kind of new innovative products or processes have you seen in Indian ER&D sector? So, if you could throw some light on that, yeah.
Absolutely, Vanna. So what we've seen is the hallmark of Indian ER&D has been its ability to actually build innovative products. But what has changed in the recent times is the ability of Indian ER&D to be able to build products with end-to-end ownership, right? And we have also seen that there is a lot of emphasis on frugal innovation, right? Mangalyaan, for example, way back, showed what India is capable of in terms of frugal innovation. But we are now also seeing some of the large global companies driving innovation from India. So are some of the Indian headquartered companies as well. Just a side example, you have Bosch, which developed a hemoglobin monitor, which is non-invasive, which is a portable point of care solution with AI ML enabled, which enables getting the results in just about less than 30 seconds, right? Similarly, Philips in India, as a part of their innovation campus in Bangalore, they developed a cost-effective ultrasound system which provides very high image quality and reliability. And I would also like to add that, while Indian ER&D has been instrumental in building cutting-edge products that impact the business metrics, they've also built products that enable social impact, right? Cyient, for example, developed what is called as a TrueNat solution. It was a first of its kind portable RT-PCR testing kit. This was during the height of the COVID crisis, which enabled reduction in the test results from just about 1 to 2 days to about 35 to 60 minutes, and about 20 as we understand, about 20 million people got tested for COVID through the solution from Cyient. So you could look at the kind of social impact that Cyient created through the solution. And then you also have Samsung, which has created a eye health diagnostic suite, which is again an AI-based, affordable, portable, smartphone-based solution that is able to detect eye ailments early on and prevent blindness, especially in the low income and medium income societies, where typically due to lack of access to healthcare, these ailments typically result in more serious issues. So here you can see that the Indian ER&D has truly been developing some cutting edge products that are making an impact both from a business as well as social perspective.
Great examples, Karan. Thank you for sharing those. So, we've talked about innovation as well. We've talked about digitalization, and Girish, you had earlier mentioned that you have you do a lot of partnerships with the startups and the startup ecosystem in the Bay Area. So, what kind of collaborations are you working on, and what are some of the areas that you're focusing on with these startups? And in addition, with the startups, are you also involved with the universities and, of course, with your hackathons, etc.? So what other collaborations are also, in the pipeline for you?
Sure. From the startup, kind of a situation, right? There are a couple stages where they need help from somebody, right? One is they have certain idea, building a prototype, so that they can get money from the VCs, right? I mean, something like that. That is, we have helped at least about 10 to 12 startups like that in that stage. Sometimes they get, sometimes they don't, and so after they raise the money, then I'm obviously working with them on in terms of completing the product. They have, of course, the core group people who can build the product, build the main technology, but around the product as well as helping them implement it at client site. And we've done that quite a lot. For example, there is a company which of another IIT Bombay, actually alumnus, who company called Get Insured, which became the technology behind the Obamacare in California. And we had about 100 people team at one point building the switch, payment switch for them, the comparison healthcare comparison switch, and then implementing it in California and 4 other states. Now they are in 8 different states, and we are their engineering partner for them for a long time. This is one of the successful associations that is and then there are other companies which we have worked with quite a lot. So during the initial phase, during the running of the company, and of course with the clients, and there's three different situations. With the universities, there are 2 kinds of relationships with universities. One is where we get their brain power, and there are a couple, my alma maters. One is IIT Bombay that we work with quite a lot, and in terms of AI, ML, they have extremely good professors who have good algorithms and those kind of things. So we work with them to solve some complex problems, collaborate with them, solve some complex problems for some clients. And with my other alma mater, Penn State University, Pennsylvania State University, where we have worked in IoT and some other areas with them. So that is those 2. And there are some universities like SNDT in India, where we work with them to design their their data science kind of curriculum, as well as another Vishwakarma Institute of Technology in Pune, where we work with similar kind of designing of their curriculum, etc. So different kinds of collaborations.
Wow, I mean, yeah, I mean that's really that's really a good thing that you've done. And then of course with the startups and helping them in their journey as well as universities as well, that's really commendable. So Karan, now sharing the same question with you. In India, in the Indian ER&D space, what kind of partnerships have you seen between the ER&D companies with the other startups or universities? And what areas are they focusing on?
So one, this is a segment, the ecosystem collaborations in ER&D is something that we've been tracking for quite some time now. And most certainly in the recent times, I would say last 3 to 4 years, we've seen an uptick in the number of collaborations amongst the ecosystem players, be it GCCs, be it startups and universities in the recent years. Right. When it comes to universities, again, there is a whole paradigm around how these partnerships are established, right? It could be ranging from just recruitment partnerships to where, as Girish mentioned, there is a joint curriculum development, to looking at maybe sponsored research projects to consulting projects, right? So there is a whole gamut of approaches or mechanisms through which we are seeing some of the industry players engage with the university, and the universities are also playing a key role, especially in terms of helping these companies ramp up capabilities around new age technology areas such as AI, ML, or cloud, or for that matter, IoT. In terms of the startup collaborations, again, we're now seeing a lot of the companies actually established startup incubators or accelerators in a way where they are able to collaborate with the startup and see different mechanisms to engage with these startups, right? They could acquire the talent from the startup, or they could acquire the startup, have startup function as a vendor to them. So there are again multiple mechanisms. And some of the examples, if I were to quote, right, Mercedes-Benz in India, the GCC in India, collaborated with an IoT driven digital parking platform called Get My Parking. Uh, the feature that is embedded in all Mercedes cars assist end users in searching and navigating to an available parking lot. So this partnership in India had global implications for Mercedes, right? So that's the power of the collaboration that's happening within the Indian context. We've also seen that Infosys, which is a service provider, collaborated with a company called IdeaForge, which is a manufacturer of UAV and advanced drones. And Infosys is taking this company to some of its global customers, right? So these are some of the kinds of partnerships that we're seeing both on the startup front as well as on the university front.
Yeah, so those are some of the very interesting examples that you've quoted, that how, the innovation and the collaborations which are happening in India is also having a global impact. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. So, of course, we've talked about digitalization, we have talked about innovation. So, and we've also talked about collaborations and partnerships, but at the heart of all of it is the employee force, the workforce which is employed in the ER&D industry, because they are the ones who are driving the innovation and the digitalization. And so also approximately around 750,000 engineers are employed in Indian ER&D industry. And of course, we've seen that many global enterprises as well, like Samsung or Intel or Philips. So they either have the largest or the second largest ER&D hubs in India. So safely we can say that India is a very attractive destination with respect to talent for the global ER&D companies. So Girish, what has been your experience? How has it been for you? Which is, you have a company which is established in the US, but you have an Indian team, and how does that happen? How are you juggling that, and how, why are we focusing, why is your company focusing on India for skills and talent, and what sets them apart? And also the second part of the question is that, what can we do to differentiate ourselves further from other countries?
Sure, a good question. And for somebody like me who is with Indian origin, this was a natural way to think about India being primary R&D or primary offshore center for us. I mean, there's not even a question about that. But in general, right, what we have found is, and we've just started something in Mexico, etc. I think um, it's a combination of everything, right? Now, one is the the education, English education, mathematical and logical bend. I've heard from different people that China, for example, is fairly good in terms of the firmware and those more engineering oriented stuff, but they're not as good in the financial applications and the kind of stuff that is needed to do a certain kind of business. India has been incorporated in the kind of global business segment for a long time. So that is a very, very good thing for India. Other thing is, over the years, India has established a pyramid structure, that means somebody at the top, and then the middle layers, and somebody training the other the bottom people. And as a result, what is happening is what happens is you can basically say, okay, build a team of so many people, and that is possible to do in a certain amount of time, which is not very easy to do other countries. You don't have to say how to do it. They generally people know how to do it, and you have to kind of maintain some quality and those kind of things. So that is very important. The other thing which is important is India is to me it is important is India has a rule of law, which is not very true in a lot of Eastern European countries, as well as China, of course, and different kind of law, right? So in India, with talent in that numbers available, that is very important for the US and European companies, the principles that there is a rule of law, and people do adopt the right practices, etc. So those are the kind of things that has worked in India's favor over the years, and plus, a lot of IT slash computer science colleges that people have drifted towards, which is have been really able to kind of scale up quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fair points, fair points made. And also, like, what else can we do to differentiate ourselves? Like, what other things, what other points can we incorporate?
I think having seen here, as well as Silicon Valley as well as India, I think even today, right? A couple of things that had come to my mind right away. I think in India, people want to become managers too soon, and they want to manage people, and I call them timesheet management. So that becomes like a true thing. Whereas they should really remain in technology as much as possible, and even if they become leaders or managers, they should really get into the nitty-gritties of things. I think that has to will happen. I think over a period. I think things have improved definitely over the last 10 years that I've been seeing, definitely. And the other thing is India has to I think really implement as well as tout the IP protection. I think it's not explicitly touted. India has taken a lot of steps, but like Israel does, for example, India has not done that as much as we should and we could. That's two other things.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Those are very valid points as well. Yes, definitely. So Karan, from your experience and from your research, where is the demand? Where are the emerging areas where we are witnessing a lot of demand for talent from the companies? So what are those emerging areas or topics where where the companies are really demanding that, okay, these are the kinds of people we really need. So what do you think they are?
Right. So if you look at the last 18 months, Vanna, it's been unprecedented in terms of the extent and the scale of digital transformation that's taken place. In fact, early last year, at the start of the pandemic or a little into the pandemic, Satya Nadella remarked that we've probably seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in about 2 months, right? And I think that statement was absolutely true. And in fact, we are probably seeing 10 months, 10 years worth of transformation in the last 10 months, right? So, uh, and this is largely because of the global demand that's been created in the context of what's happening with the pandemic, right? Um, we are relooking at how sales and marketing is done. We're moving from what we call as footfalls to eyeballs. Operations is getting fundamentally changed, right? The uh, workplace and the workforce, also there are new paradigms around that too, right? So in midst of all of this, right, so talent becomes a central enabler to it. And we are seeing that skills such as IoT, cybersecurity, right? AR, VR, AI, ML. So these are, in fact, becoming ubiquitous to almost every organization. At a point in time, right, a few years ago, you had the tech natives or the tech behemoths who had hordes of this kind of skill sets as a part of their organization. But now, if you look at the traditional automotive companies, the traditional industrial companies, they are now competing for the same set of skill sets. So that's really what's generating this demand in the market.
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course, the pandemic has really accelerated that as well, and then the companies are also, increasingly digitalizing their processes and products. And of course, therefore, we are witnessing a lot of demand for, these specific niche areas, which earlier used to be niche, but now they have become very mainstream as well. So, Girish, coming back to you, you had mentioned a lot of collaborations with the universities in US as well as in India as well. So, are you also involved in any skilling programs because, you are hiring from the universities as well? So, are there any skilling programs that you're also doing it in-house or collaborating with some other industry bodies or companies? So, what are some of the topics also that you're, covering? Just if you could share some points regarding that.
Yeah, absolutely. The skilling has to be done, no matter what, right? I mean, the services company are, the whole, kind of value proposition to our partner, our customers, or partners, whatever is the skill production. I think that's very important. And our I think because of the increased demand right now, we had to substantially accelerate our the skill building. And then we used to hire in the past freshers and experienced people. Now we are hiring intermediate people also, and then training them adequately for the right kind of work, right projects, those kind of things. And in the areas, I think one area that current I think he didn't mention is the automation. Automation is very, very critical. There's automation of infrastructure as well as development processes. So they call it DevOps, right? Which is very, very critical, and those people are probably some of the hardest to find. And digitalization, what you're talking about, then the way the people like Facebook or Google, they kind of release the products. Everybody wants to release it, including banking. They want to release the same way, and that is becoming very critical in addition to other areas. So that is so training in different clouds. I mean, because every stack is different. Microsoft versus Amazon versus Google. So all this training, the data side has to be done, and we have to. I mean, we keep on upgrading the training, and as we learn more and more, and that's what happens. And we do it primarily in house, but we also use some external kind of outsource people to give some very specialized training to our employees. Quite a lot.
Yeah, sure. Yes. Yeah. I mean, those are some very, very valid points that you had shared. Of course, automation is definitely right up there because everything is getting automated. Definitely,
Yeah.
yes.
And
Yeah.
if I can just add, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the context of an enterprise, right? So you typically had the CTO role, you had the CIO role, the CDO role, and there's a lot of convergence happening across these functions and resulting in creation of new roles, right? And in fact, some of the job roles that we are seeing in the market did not even exist 2 years ago, right? So, I mean, it's anybody's guess in terms of what job roles are going to be 2 years from now, but it is a market which is in a state of flux with a lot of changes that are happening.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, that's a very, very valid point because suddenly, so many things have changed. Not suddenly also, but of course, over the course, more so in the last 2 years, so many things have changed as well. And rightly said that how there have been increase in new roles as well. The creation of new roles and creation of new titles in the companies. So, Karan, coming to you again, what have you observed in the ER&D sector in India? So, what kind of collaborations are happening and you are witnessing for the skilling of employees by the companies? Is it, some kind of a collaboration with industry bodies or is it with universities? What have you seen in your research and in your experience?
Sure. I did mention about how the talent market is today in a state of flux and is heated, literally, right? Organizations today are left with no choice but to invest in learning and development initiatives. It's table stakes, right? As Girish also mentioned, and we're seeing organizations like Samsung, Intel, Philips focus on programs, that help skill development with regard to technical skills, right, in the new age areas that I mentioned, functional skills, especially around product management. We've seen that as being a gap in India for a long time, but some of those gaps are being addressed. But product management is a key skill that we believe can help India take increased end-to-end ownership of products that get developed. Right. We are also seeing a lot of investments being made in behavioral skills like leadership skills, etc. Right. In addition, we are also seeing companies like MBRDI, Infosys invest significantly in terms of fostering diversity, right, to encourage higher participation of women in the workforce. So while this is on the organization side, again, in terms of how they are collaborating, they're either collaborating with universities, they're also signing up to learning platforms, that enables skilling to be done at scale within the organization. At the same time, you also have initiatives from NASSCOM, like the Future Skills program, that's providing the much needed fillip to skilling in India. And then you have the Government of India initiative, the Skill India initiative, though not specific to ER&D, but this was something that was launched in 2015. It aims to train about 400 million people in different skills by 2022. So there is definitely a skilling ecosystem coming together to really help India as a country address the emerging needs from a talent perspective. And not just that, when we look at Intel, they have been trying to run programs at high school levels in partnership with CBSE to train students on AI and ML. So that's something very interesting, right? So yeah, the skilling ecosystem is in full momentum, is what I would say from an India perspective.
Yeah, I mean, those are very interesting examples that you shared, especially the Intel one where, they're collaborating at right from the high school level. So yeah, that's really interesting. So, we've talked about various topics today, from innovation and talent and collaboration. So, since we're talking about Advantage India, this is a question for both of you. What is Advantage India? What are the advantages of India, of Indian ER&D sector? So, Karan, probably if you could go first. Yeah.
Sure. So in the past, probably in the last few years, I would say that India was perceived as a destination for ER&D from the vantage point of cost. But I think that's no longer the case, right? So we are actually, as an industry, we are fighting the cost arbitrage tag. I believe the real differentiators from an India perspective are the fact that we have scale of talent, right? The scale of talent, I don't think is available anywhere in the world, right? Secondly, depth of technology expertise, right? So be it traditional areas of ER&D or some of the emerging areas of ER&D. So when I say traditional areas, it could be mechanical engineering services, right? And then you have electronics, embedded, and then you also have the digital part of ER&D, right? So then you have a very strong ecosystem of GCCs, service providers, startups, and universities. You earlier mentioned in terms of the number of GCCs that we have, the number of service providers that we have. So each of these companies are contributing, or each of these ecosystem constituents are contributing to India furthering its agenda as an ER&D destination. I also believe that in the recent times, the government has been playing a key role in terms of easing a lot of policy frameworks that help companies set up their presence in India. There's also the whole market view, right? So India presents a huge market for many of the companies who need not just look at India as a hub for ER&D for global markets, but also as a hub for ER&D for Indian markets and other regional markets, right? So they could potentially experiment, explore products for the Indian market, which probably have a larger appeal in the other regional markets or emerging markets across the globe. And one thing that I believe is not spoken about a lot is also the mindset of the Indian talent, which I believe brings in a lot of learnability, flexibility, and adaptability. Right? I think the success of Indian technology services industry, not just ER&D, can be attributed to this very unique mindset that our talent is able to bring in.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, some very, very valid points shared, Karan. Thanks. Girish, same question to you as well. So what is Advantage India? What, according to you, because, you are also, you have access to a lot of Bay Area talent as well. So what, according to you, is Advantage India?
I think if you one of the things you should say is price to performance ratio kind of stuff, right? With Bay Area, talent is very expensive and not available in that much, quantity, I would say. Whereas in India, it's you could just said there are pyramids available that the talent could be built over time, and there is nothing, no such, except for companies like IBM or whatever. There are no such training pyramids available in the US. I mean, all the startups, they want ready-made people who can start to working or delivering tomorrow. It is. So this is it's a long-term play, but it's a very stable play in India. It's that's number one. And one thing that Karan mentioned, which was flexibility, adaptability, those are extremely key. And there are in the many times I've seen in the US, right, the people with certain technology stack, who know certain technology stack, will not do something else. Whereas India, they will adapt, they will kind of migrate, and so the whatever they've learned from the abstraction level in one stack, they will replicate or they'll use it in another stack. So which is very good. This flexibility is adaptability are very, very important. And the third thing is, of course, see, in today's market, right? In addition to building the product, the making the product available to the customer is very important. And for that, you need to do end point level integration and those kind of things, where you can actually build a team in India where you could do both R&D as well as the implementation, which is a very good, kind of attribute of what we do here in India. So so compared to Silicon Valley, again, it's the scale issue. It's not the quality of talent is extremely good out here, but it has to be kind of aligned with the scale in India in a big way.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, that's a valid point here. Yeah. So, of course, we've talked about, what are the advantages of India, and we've also talked about various initiatives that the government has taken, whether it is Skill India and so many other initiatives that, the industry as well has taken to make India a formidable player in the global ER&D space. So, what are, Girish, I'll come to you first. What are some of the areas that we still need to focus on? And what are some of the initiatives which the industry can take, to, solidify that position in the global ER&D space? So what do you think?
Yeah, I think as the of course, the digitization, cloudification, etc., the new things, etc. I think if you look at what could happen, etc. I think being one step ahead is very important. I think that understanding what is going to come down the pike and building the skills is very important. And I don't know whether it's a government or it's universities or it is the industry itself should spend the time on that or thinking about that. I don't really believe that government can do everything, and Obviously, they can help, they can nudge, they can give a lot of incentives, but the industry has to kind of figure out how to do it themselves.
Sure. Yeah. Of course. I mean, the policies and the initiatives are already there. How do we use it is
Yes.
very important. Yeah, that's very true. So Karan, same question with you, to you. So what do you think? What more can be done by the industry or the government? What can be the focus areas according to you?
So I think we've come a long way when it comes to ER&D in the last decade, right? So I was very much a part of the journey way back in 2008 when the whole ER&D segment was in its infancy. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I believe that going forward, that the role that India can play in engineering the future of global organizations, that will be the key. We can no longer look at the past and say that the future will probably be an extrapolation of the past, right? The future is going to be very different. The challenges are very different. The imperatives are very different, right? So, so in terms of addressing that future that is ahead of us, I believe there are certain things that we need to look at. Firstly, we've spoken about skilling, right? We've said that there are already initiatives at play, to foster skilling, upskilling, reskilling. But at the same time, if you look at the global demand, right, I believe that we still fall short in terms of ability to address the global demand, right? We need to definitely evolve creative ways, to skill at scale. And more particularly, I referred to this earlier as well. Product management skills is something that we should be able to hone in India, take increased ownership of products from India. And as a nation, I also believe that while we look at ER&D, while we have great strengths in engineering and development, the R in ER&D could be a gap area that needs focus, right? So how do we really foster that research in ER&D will be a key question, right? So what can be done? And one of the ways that we thought is clusters of innovation, right? Clusters of innovation has been the Israel model of bringing together some of the brightest minds, enable cross-pollination of ideas, leverage shared infrastructure in a way that it mitigates the costs associated with innovation. Right? So if we are able to replicate something like that in India, I think it can definitely go a long way to foster, to fuel further innovation in the country. And lastly, I also believe that when you look at countries like US, or for that matter, Israel now. So they have been encouraging a lot of expat talent, right? So in India, I think for us to really open up our horizons, and again, going back to the point around cross-pollination of ideas, we should be able to be a magnet for expat talent from across the globe. Right, so that will be an interesting thing in terms of how we enable that, and I believe that's what puts countries like United States as amongst the top when it comes to, to being a destination for innovation. So how do we replicate that in India is a question that definitely begs a lot of answers, but a mechanism for sure, that can foster innovation in the country.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point because recently in the ER&D summit as well we had a session which was about creating of these super innovation clusters, and NASSCOM was running that that discussion, and then how they had invited in experts from the Canadian super innovation cluster as well, from Israel as well, and from Fraunhofer as well. So yeah, I've been learning, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but learning from the best examples there. So that is that's a valid point. So yes, this has been a very very interesting conversation and a very engaging one, and we have touched upon so many points with respect to the global as well as the Indian ER&D sector. So any concluding remarks from either of you? Girish, you first. Any concluding points?
Sure. I think the discussion has been very good. I think I really enjoyed talking to you as well as Karan and Vandana. And then I think I think India has just, to me, India just sort of not scratched the surface, but at least played the first innings, I would say, up to now, and more has yet to come. And I think the more I think the best thing that has happened in India, I think, is the say if you look at the past 2 decades, right? People have been focusing on the markets abroad, and they're not. Then I mean, because it's difficult, right? Unless you're in that market, you can't do this. But now that with Flipkart and other companies, they're payment companies and everything, that they've started focusing on Indian market. You have a indigenous R&D. So I think that will be the real growth of talent, growth of different kind of different skilling kind of stuff. The product management that Karan talked about, I think that'll come there, and that'll come out. I think that has done really well. And I think more and more these things happen in terms of automobiles, in terms of computers, in terms of everything else. I think that will be a good way for India to really leapfrog anybody else in that.
Yeah, I mean, see, yeah, definitely. Those are some very, very interesting points that you've covered. Karan, any concluding parting remarks from your side?
No, absolutely. I think the Indian ER&D has come of age, and when you have global leaders like Thomas Weber, former board member of Mercedes, say, and I quote, that there is a huge part of India in every Mercedes. It truly is a testimony to the value and impact that India can create as an ER&D destination, right? So I'm sure, as Greece said, we still scratch the surface, right? Again. We just have a small percentage of global companies that have set up their ER&D GCCs in India. The potential is huge. So I think it's really time for the world. When it comes to thinking ER&D, it's about thinking India as a destination. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Vandana, for this wonderful discussion.
Thanks
to both of you. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. I wish we could continue this for another hour. But yeah, very, very interesting points that have come out, very engaging insights as well, which we have touched upon. And thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you so much for this discussion today. So we'll end the discussion, and I would request everyone to kindly go to our website. The link is in the description, and check out this report of Advantage India Gateway to Global Engineering, R&D and Innovation. So with that, thank you again, and thank you so much, and we'll conclude the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.